Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today for the 7th and final Displacement Response Strategy community meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to provide a summary of the stakeholder meetings that we've had to date over the last several weeks. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the Displacement Response website. We wanted to let you know that we are aware that a part of Mountain View may not have power, and those of us with power may have intermittent outages. So if we do get disconnected, for those who are able to connect right now, we will get reconnected as soon as we can. Because this video is being recorded, we will be posting it onto the Displacement Response website. So for folks who cannot join us tonight, there will be access to this video recording. So we did want to let you know. We also want to let you know that there are interpretation services available. So before we jump into the rest of the presentation, I'd like to invite our interpreters to welcome folks and explain how to get into the Spanish and Mandarin language interpretation rooms. So I'd like to invite Anna and Ivy to help interpret this information.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Esta tarde tendremos interpretación en español. Si usted mira en la parte inferior de su pantalla, seleccione el idioma español. Gracias.
大家晚上好，欢迎大家来到今晚的流离失所应对的会议总结。那么今天晚上我们提供中文翻译，当您点击屏幕上出现的语言图标的时候，选择 Chinese， 用中文收听今晚的会议。点击图标的时候，您还可以选择将原始音频静音。谢谢。
Thank you very much, Anna and Ivy. So just brief introductions. I'm Wayne Chen. I'm the Assistant Community Development Director. And presenting tonight with me is Trisha Gonzalez. You may have seen her in various meetings. She is our Breakthrough Grant Fellow. She comes to us from the Breakthrough Grant program that is funded by the Partnership for the Bay's Future, a program that is assisting cities in helping to develop housing policies, including displacement response policies. And of course, we have our amazing multicultural engagement program team, and we have our great staff from the rent stabilization program as well. So thank you all to the city team for being here. And so just to summarize again, the goals for today is to provide a summary of the meeting information that we've heard to date. We started out back early January with an introduction meeting. Since that time, we've held 5 stakeholder meetings. We want to provide a summary of those meetings. And what we would like to know is whether we captured your input correctly, and if there's anything that we are missing, or if there's new information that you would like to provide. When I hand this presentation off to Trisha later on in the presentation, what you will see is that what we've tried to do is summarize some key themes and topics that we heard frequently. We also tried to provide more specific information on specific topic areas that folks may have provided input on. So you'll hear both themes and specific information about specific topics when we go over the summary slides. So I did want to explain that a little bit. And so we've gone through the welcome logistics, and I'm going to go through quickly again for the background in case folks have not participated in this process today. You'll have a little bit of the background. We're going to spend the bulk of the time going over the summary of our input received, and then we would like to go over questions and answers and have enough time for folks to be able to comment. You can feel free to place comments in the discussion or the Q&A box at any time. We'll be monitoring that and going through whatever input you may have. And then you could also raise your hand as well to participate. Again, there are interpretation services available. There's a button that you can click, the globe icon, to either enter a Spanish interpretation room or a Mandarin interpretation room. And then before we get into it fully, we've shared this information before, but we know this is an important topic for all members of the community. There may be very diverse perspectives on this topic, and so we just ask that everyone respect all the participants during the meeting and allow folks to be able to provide their input. And we'll be managing the meeting to make sure that folks have a respectful place for dialogue. And then how to participate. Again, you can enter comments in the chat. You could raise your hand. There's a raise hand button on your Zoom screen. For anyone who's calling in by phone, you could press *9 to raise your hand, and we'll be able to see you and call on you. So again, at the background, this process started about three and a half years ago. There were a series of redevelopment projects, and this got elevated to a council priority. And back in 2019 and 2020, we established an initial framework for doing this work. So there were 5 key principles established and 6 initial policy areas to work on. These were all unanimously agreed to by council at the time. Just to summarize, our displacement response strategy addresses or seeks to address both prevention, because we have an interest in preventing tenant displacement, but we also understand that there may be situations where displacement, whether temporary or permanent displacement, cannot be avoided. And so mitigation is another part of the strategy, which is if displacement occurs, how could different policies or programs be implemented to make the impacts of that displacement more manageable? And then finally, there are other responses that we are looking at as well. And so when we started this process a few weeks ago, we did flag some key focus areas, which are replacement requirements and developing local replacement requirements. And there is existing state law that we have talked about, Senate Bill 330, SB 330, that is currently in place. It's currently set to expire in 2030, but that law does provide replacement requirements for demolition projects. And there is also what is called an Ellis Act provision, where cities with rent stabilization can create replacement requirements. And what you'll see in the summary section later on is that there were a variety of input about local replacement requirements, and including having the city look at local SB 330 requirements. So this is one key focus area. Acquisition and preservation program was another key focus area that we have direction from council to evaluate, and that is setting up a program and hoping to develop partnerships that can be able to help run the program, and also to help bring funding to the program, because we know that acquisition and preservation may need additional resources. Some of the main housing resources may not be available or easily available for acquiring and preserving existing housing units. So setting up a program and establishing partnerships is another key focus area. And then opportunity to purchase is also a potential program that council has asked staff to evaluate. And we did receive a variety of input regarding opportunity to purchase. Opportunity to purchase programs, there's 2 general types. One is geared for nonprofit affordable housing developers, COPA, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. And then there's another version that's primarily geared towards tenants and tenant groups to be able to make an offer for a site or an apartment building for sale. And so tenant opportunity to purchase programs, TOPA, is another version that we are evaluating. So that's a key focus area. And then there are other strategies that we are evaluating as well, whether that's modifying the city's existing tenant relocation assistance ordinance, making replacement requirements for ownership units more feasible in other items as well, whether that's first right of refusal or return for displaced tenants or other policies and programs. So with that, I'm going to transition it over to Tricia to go over the summary of the stakeholder meetings and what we heard in each meeting.
Thank you, Wayne. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us during our current 7th session. As you can see here on this list, today is our 7th session. And in the next slide, I am going to review some overarching themes that we gathered. But prior to that, I'd like to just revisit some key terms that Wayne mentioned and that I'm going to mention again in the next slides. That first one is SB 330. That's a state law that requires replacement units when rent stabilized housing is demolished, and that's currently set to expire in 2030. Then we have CSFRA, Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act, is the city's rent stabilization program, which was passed in 2016. And then we have TREO, which is the city's Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance, which requires relocation assistance when tenants are displaced from their units if they meet certain qualifications. And then we have OPA, which is the Opportunity to Purchase program, and requires property owners to notify nonprofit developers and or tenant groups when they want to sell their property and provide them the first opportunity to make an offer or to match another offer. And as Wayne just stated, there's 2 different versions of this, COPA and TOPA. Next slide, please. Our first session was a general session, and these are themes, overarching themes that were presented during that session. Preventing displacement is preferred, but if it does occur, having other housing opportunities to stay in Mountain View is important. Goal should be to prevent any displacement. City needs to act fast to prevent any more displacement. There's a desire for home ownership opportunities, homes with the support of community programs such as community land trust, co-ops, public bank, and funding. If temporary relocation is required, it's very important that school-aged children remain in the same school. There's also interest in Opportunity to Purchase Act programs and a strong desire to know when building is for sale before it goes to the market. There's also an interest in taxing vacant rental units. We then have the property owner stakeholder meeting, and those overarching themes included city is transferring all of the burden onto property owners, which does not make any sense and is not fair. It is the responsibility of the city to help people with displacement issues. Adding new supply, market rate and affordable, is the way to address tenant displacement. Adding regulations, requirements is not the way to address tenant displacement. They create unintended consequences and make projects infeasible. High costs, city fees, and complicated city process impedes redevelopment and new production. Paying for tenant buyouts, relocation benefits makes projects, rehab or redevelopment projects, infeasible. Interest in discussing innovative logistical options, such as partnering with property owners to address temporary displacement. The majority of property owners are not millionaires. It's important to distinguish between large properties versus small properties. Small properties cannot cover the costs that a larger owner can. COPA programs primarily benefits nonprofits. TOPA programs could be okay as it benefits tenants. Those were the major themes for the property owner session, and we're going to jump into the nonprofit developer summary. And those themes include interest in doing acquisition, preservation, and rehab work. Acquisition of smaller buildings are more challenging. Larger buildings of 80 to 100 units have the best economies of scale. We think of the resident first, without the thought of displacing residents. If residents come with the building, we want to keep them in place. It is not a question if we would displace them or not. City can help with project feasibility by streamlining recording of affordable housing regulatory agreements, as well as flexibility with temporary relocation requirements. The idea of first look when it comes to OPA is beneficial because we are competing with cash offers. First look should come with a fund that looks as nimble as cash so we can compete. It is important to address over-income tenants and avoid inadvertently displacing those who may not be able to qualify for an affordable housing unit because they exceed the income qualifications for a preserved unit or a replacement unit. Financing for acquisition projects are challenging because of the lack of funding and tax credits. City funding can help. Knowing the income levels of the existing tenants can really help the developer determine the affordable housing that is needed for a preservation or replacement project. And lastly, we can work with a preference for displaced tenants, but we need to make sure a fair housing analysis is completed.
Thanks, Tricia. And just really quickly, I think we have a note to slow down a little bit. I just want to check with the group. Is the pace that Tricia was ending up with, is that okay? Or do you think it would be helpful to slow down a little bit further? Nancy or anyone who would like to let us know. Otherwise, we can continue at the same pace.
Okay, I can.
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay. Looks like speed is okay. Maybe just a touch slower, I think, but we're almost on the right pace. Thanks so much.
Sure, of course. Thank you. All right, in our market rate developer session, the overarching themes were as follows. Focus on ways to increase housing supply. Incentivize developers, such as providing higher floor area ratios or FARs, densities, streamlining the process, fee waivers. City needs a more efficient process to get projects done. It takes too long and discourages development. Project team expediters would help. Find ways to fill below market rate units faster. Identify best practices instead of reinventing things. City ownership of land may be useful. Relocation may not last forever, and land could be used for other uses in the future, such as needed parks or open space. Publicly noticing a building for sale may scare tenants and staff that live in the building. Adding more housing supply will reduce housing prices because rents would need to be lowered to fill the units. In practice, it may not work that way. There is a building with 3 vacancies because prospective tenants think the rent is too high. And then we followed up with 2 tenant stakeholder sessions. This first one was our virtual meeting. And those themes included OPA programs are supported, including COPA and/or TOPA. Mobile home park residents also interested in OPA program. City funding needed to make such programs a success. First right of return to a rehabilitated or new replacement unit is important. Explore working with property owners willing to set aside units that can be used for temporary relocation. There needs to be a temporary place to stay if relocation is involved. Consider a tax on vacant rental units. The local version of state SB 330 replacement requirements is needed. City needs to put more roadblocks to prevent displacement. Identify a way to de-incentivize demolition if the unit is in good condition. Protections are needed for vulnerable groups, such as the working class and seniors. Housing is a human right, not a source for profit. Many tenants do not feel brave enough to complain about maintenance issues to property owners out of fear. Displacement with multiple moves is disruptive, especially for school-aged children. And in the next tenant stakeholder session, which was held in person, these were the following themes. Local ordinance is needed for when SB 330 sunsets. Continue to make improvements to city's tenant relocation assistance ordinance, also known as TREO. The city needs to ensure a temporary residence is available when rehabilitation and redevelopment occur, such as relocating within corporate portfolios. Displacement can be managed if tenants have first right of return. We want an OPA, but financial support and resources are needed from the city, community land trusts, tech, especially for TOPA. If displacement is unavoidable, alert tenants and compensate fairly, and ensure that tenants are not pressured to leave to get out of TREO requirements. More affordable housing at lower levels are needed. Identify empty sites for construction. Legalize multiple families in one unit to help make the rents affordable. Reduce barriers to housing for those with limited English proficiency and families that do not have legal status. Qualifications and high credit score requirements make it difficult to find affordable housing. Laws are needed to prevent demolition and to require that units be maintained. Building community is important. So we thank you for the feedback, and we're here today to ensure that we've captured everything accurately. And another method of how we're going about that is to have our ongoing one-on-one meetings with individuals and groups. We have held 5 meetings to date, and we do have some additional meetings scheduled for the near future. We also did find that a lot of the written comments that were emailed to the city were pretty consistent with the feedback we heard through the stakeholder meetings. And I just want to remind folks that you can still contact the email address listed here on the screen, displacementresponse@mountainview.gov. If you'd like to schedule a one-on-one or have additional questions, the city staff is definitely willing to meet with you. So thanks again, and I'm going to hand it back to Wayne for some Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Tricia. And again, we'll be posting information updates to the Displacement Response website, which you'll see on the screen here. Again, for folks who may have joined a little bit later, we do have interpretation services available. Because we did provide this information a bit earlier, I'd like to ask if the interpreters can go ahead and interpret this information in Spanish and Mandarin again. So I'll pause for that.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. El día de hoy tendremos interpretación al español. Por favor, mire la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccione el idioma español. También puede seleccionar el audio original cuando haga clic en el icono. Gracias.
大家好，本次会议提供中文翻译。当您点击屏幕上出现的语言图标的时候，选择 Chinese， 以用中文收听今晚的会议。点击图标的时候，您还可以选择将原始音频静音。谢谢。
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we just have 2 questions for discussion. And of course, if folks have other input or questions or comments, please feel free to share them. But our first question is for each of the groups, for folks who would like to let us know, did we summarize your main points accurately? So I'm just going to leave this here, the slide here, and let folks either raise their hand or submit information to the Q&A or chat box.
Sorry. I'm going to go ahead and switch our interpreters really quickly. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any input in the chat or the Q&A box. Do we have any hands raised?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Tessa.
Good evening, everybody. This is Tessa McFarland. I just wanted to thank you for such a really thorough presentation. And I was part of a group that met with Wayne on a one-on-one. And I guess, you know, one of the things that came up was the COPA and TOPA, and just curious whether these programs have been successful elsewhere, because the feedback we got was that you know, it can create delay in the sales process. And so I think if a COPA or TOPA was put into place, it would really have to be finely tuned in a way that would make it workable. And so that was one comment. And then the other comment was on the units, the 1,000 units lost. I guess we had just asked for a little more of a deep dive into that, and and really look at the total number of affordable units and BMR units, the total in the pipeline, where the in lieu fees have gone, and that sort of thing. And then again, I think on the displacement strategy, I think that there should be some means testing so that it really does help the people who really need it. And so those were my oh, and then that one final point, there was some discussion during our discussion of, that there are naturally occurring affordable units, and that sometimes the housing providers, they'd like to rehabilitate them, but it's such a difficult process under the CISFRA regs to try to get an adjustment for the annual general adjustment for the covered units to allow for some capital improvements to be made. And so I think the point on that was just that, we have to look at how the entirety of the city regs affect the question that we're asking. And so, for example, how do we preserve naturally occurring affordable units? Well, one way to do it would be to allow housing providers more leeway in how they rehabilitate those units, and and make it work really for everybody. So those are my comments. Thank you all so much for all your efforts. Really appreciate it.
Yep, thank you so much, Tessa. And I do want to confirm that yes, we've received written input from you, and for folks who do want to send written input, our intention is to be able to directly include the written input into our staff report for council when the date for that is finalized and we're writing at the summary. And I think just to clarify, we did focus our input summaries here on just the formal stakeholder meetings, but we do plan to make sure that we are summarizing the one-on-one sessions as well. We didn't do that here tonight because they're ongoing, but we do plan to include that in one of the pieces that we did here was just take a look at the data again, which we'll do. Means testing did come up more than once, so we want to be able to summarize that for council. And rehab, and especially for smaller units, that theme came up a couple of different times in the stakeholder meetings as well. So definitely just want to confirm that we've received the input. We're going through the process of doing more evaluation right now, and we do intend to include that information for council to process and digest. We are also, as part of our homework, looking at case studies of other cities, primarily in the Bay Area, but also in California, and then also examples across the country for Opportunity to Purchase Act programs. Our understanding is that it is relatively new, so we have a sort of a handful of case studies that we're looking at, and we're going over how each city is either has set them up for those that have passed, or for those cities that are going through the process of evaluating and considering approving a program, what information and what kind of criteria and program design elements they're thinking about. So we're putting together some information there. So we're definitely looking closely at the cities that either have them or are evaluating OPA programs. So thanks so much, Tessa.
Okay, next we're going to unmute Philip.
All right, thank you, Andrea. I just wanted to give some feedback. I attended both of the tenant stakeholder meetings, and I thought the themes that you convey on slides 21 and 22 pretty well captured what I heard. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much for confirming. Yes, if we're on the mark, we want to hear it so that we know when we're writing it up for council, we are on the mark. And if we have a tweak that is needed, or if we need to add anything else, do let us know as well. So whether we're on the mark or we need to add a little bit more, both comments are more than welcome. So thanks for that.
Wayne, up until when can folks share input? There's a question in the chat box. Is there a deadline to submit that input?
There's not a deadline right now for staff. The sort of practical input process for us to be able to consider and write it up. There's that piece, but then of course folks can submit comments up until the day of the council meeting. We are close to confirming and finalizing when that meeting will be, and once we have that information, we will post it to the website. And we will send out a notification to anyone who is registered for the displacement response interest list. It will be by June. So it will happen in the next few months. So Q2 of 2023. So we hope to be able to bring it back to council before June, but no later than June is what we're targeting right now. So once we have the information out, then, and if there are any updates in terms of the timing for scheduling one-on-ones, we'll be able to provide some information. Ideally, if you'd like to have a one-on-one so that your input can get into the council report for when we summarize it, or to give us enough time to be able to analyze your suggestions, the sooner the better. So we'll give you enough lead time once we know, and ideally for the one-on-one sessions, probably up to a few weeks before the council meetings when we'll need to have that so we can actually do the analysis. But if you do want to continue to send email responses and provide additional input up until the council meeting, of course you're free to do that. We just may not be able to packet it up with the council report.
All right, perfect. So I see Edie, you did have a comment, but your hand is up, so I'll go ahead and unmute you.
Thank you. I just wanted to give an alternate point of view on whether Treo should be available to all income levels. So there are things that income alone doesn't capture. You don't know who is sending one or two or who knows how many children through college at the time. And despite high income, may have low disposable income. And also, if you restrict Treo benefits to only certain income levels, then is that a disincentive to renting to people who can afford the rent, but are at a lower income level, rather than aiming for higher income renters who you would not have to pay Treo for if you ever were looking to empty and demolish the property. We don't know who's sending money to relatives out of the area and needs the lower rent. And just so I support Treo for all income levels, because all kinds of each renter family has their own story and their own needs. And our housing stock, except when a nonprofit takes over, having our housing stock, needed maintenance is required of the property owner, and replacing old units with new units changes the rental housing stock in our whole city and makes it more expensive. So I strongly support maintenance of buildings over demolition and replacement. Thank you.
Thanks for that comment, Edie. I think that was a new perspective, so we'll definitely capture that. Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any other hands or questions in the Q&A or chat.
Why don't I go ahead and just hop over to the second question, and it's related, and we've sort of already started to touch on it. Give me 1 second here. Again, there's different ways to participate. Enter comments in the chat box. You can raise your hand. For phone attendees, please press *9 to raise your hand. And then the corollary to the first question: are there any main points we have missed? And I think Edie provided an example of one perspective that we had not heard yet. Is there anything else from any of the participants here tonight?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and ask Tim to unmute.
Hi, Tim McKenzie, he, him pronouns, Montaloma neighborhood. I don't know if this is the situation in Mountain View or what, but I've definitely seen sort of in the zeitgeist in news reports across the country talking about the housing crisis generally, of like for-profit multinational corporations purchasing housing stock and then turning it into perpetual renting and increasing the prices. And I think that there's it was captured a little bit in some of the summaries, but there's a big difference between, say, a landlord that helps manage a few properties, is responsive to tenants, versus some faceless corporation that is just seeing this as a source of money. And I think that there could and should be some sort of additional city tax that could be used to fund Treo or things like that, depending on the size of the landlord, the number of properties that they actually own and maintain. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know the exact details of how that would work out, but it's something that scales with the size of the. I know we did that with the business tax, so something that could scale similarly, and something that can favor actual human beings rather than faceless multinational corporations that are mining the residents of the city for profit, and not providing housing as a human right. So I want to pull on that thread a little bit, and also just highlight again, I think this was mentioned in the summaries, but vacancy taxes for if people are just holding the apartment off to try to get someone locked in at a higher rate. There should be some sort of cost to that. I know that was already captured, but I'm not sure that I really heard that first point, and I wanted to highlight that.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, I think that first point is also a new perspective. So thanks for mentioning that, and we'll capture it. And if you're aware of any examples of something that you were referring to, we'd love to hear examples. I know folks in their email comments, when they've been summarizing their points, have also pointed us to different housing authorities or different agencies or cities that may be reflective of the comment or the types of options that they're thinking of. So pointing us to different sources, different programs that may exist, or different cities are also most welcome. So thank you.
All right, and as Wayne mentioned, you can raise your hand if you would like to speak. You can type your question in the Q&A or in the chat. And if you prefer to type your question in another language, such as Spanish or Chinese, feel free to do that, and we can translate that for you. I see Edie. I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute.
So one thing that did come up in the tenant meeting I attended was just interest to research and find out more about Airbnb apartments. And how much is that changing the use of the current stock of apartments in Mountain View? And then this is Treo related. And so I think that, a way to strengthen the Treo is to look more at rate of return at the same rent. And in other words, even for someone, like some Treo might convert to BMR or, some type of affordable housing, and then it'll be income qualified. But for someone who is over that income level, the ability to return at the same rent or, an AGA escalated rent would be much more meaningful than the rate of return to the market rate.
I think you're muted, Wayne.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Edie. The option that you were referring to is one of the options that we're evaluating under the Ellis Act. So we're studying that and understanding what kind of initial rents could be set for, I guess I'll call them new CSFR units under the Ellis Act. So we are studying that. So thanks for flagging that.
All right, our next hand is from Reina. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hola, buenas noches. Así que ustedes ya han escuchado las dos partes, las personas que rentan y los dueños. Están evaluando estas opiniones de las dos partes y esas evaluaciones se las van a llevar ustedes a los concejales. Ustedes han visto las dos partes. ¿Qué nos motivaría? ¿Qué ustedes nos darían para motivarnos nosotros y seguir con la lucha de renta asequible para los residentes de Mountain View que trabajan, tienen su familia, viven por mucho tiempo? A mí una de las mejores partes que me ha gustado de estas juntas es que uno pueda comprar cuando los dueños quieran vender, primero salga a la venta a las personas que vivimos ahí, porque al final de cuentas más o menos es la cantidad que pagamos por mes.
Thank you. Would one of our interpreters be able to interpret the question?
I can go ahead in Spanish. Reina would like to say good evening and obviously let you know that you've heard both sides, both for wanting to rent and own. And what would you give us or let us know to do to motivate us to keep asking for this affordable housing? We live in Mountain View and we enjoy living here. And really where we're asking for affordable housing, the pricing that's coming out is really what we're already paying. So we're just asking, what would you suggest that we do or say as you go to council?
Thank you very much for that question. I think one piece of information that folks could provide would be to, when we're looking at replacement requirements or the ability for cities to be able to establish replacement requirements, we're looking at provisions that the state has provided. We're looking at laws that the state has provided for cities to be able to create these replacement requirements. And for example, the state SB 330 replacement requirements provides information about the income levels that the new replacement units need to be at. One of the comments that we heard from the nonprofit developers is making sure that the incomes of the existing tenants could match the rent levels of the new units is important, because if there is a mismatch, displacement could still occur. So I think it'd be helpful to know the types of rent levels you're looking at, or what is affordable for your income and for your household size. The way we determine affordability levels is both based on the income and the household size, the number of people of the household. So I think that kind of information could help inform the city council in terms of if it wishes to move forward with local replacement requirements, what income levels and rents would those new units need to be at? And what kind of sales prices, if they are going to be condos or for sale housing, what kind of sales prices would they need to be at to be affordable for an existing family or a household? So that kind of information can be helpful so that we know how to evaluate different income levels for potential replacement requirement programs. So I think that's one piece of information. And I think council had asked us to take a look at ways of addressing temporary temporary relocation. So if you have additional input about what could be helpful for you, if there needs to be temporary relocation assistance and being able to move back to a new unit, we'd like to hear your experience and your thoughts about what would be helpful in that way as well.
Thank you. We also have a hand here from Phil, so I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute.
All right, thank you. So we've been using AMI as sort of a logical way of defining income levels. But there's one issue with AMI, and that is, which is area median income. And that is, as lower income people can no longer afford to live in Mountain View and move out, the AMI will increase, which increases the BMR costs and income qualifications for the remaining low income residents. And so I'm wondering, is there any way to make the AMI measurement a little bit smarter so that we're not continually increasing it, sort of a positive feedback on displacement?
Thanks for that question. I think what you're suggesting is that there is a feedback loop in that way, so that if folks who may not be able to live in the area or Mountain View move out, that may have an input into how the area's median income is calculated the next year, and so on and so forth. So as we lose more lower income families, then the AMI levels get higher, and so on and so forth. So on that note, we don't have the ability to change the AMI levels that we refer to, or whether it's from the state's Housing and Community Development Department, or whether it's through another set of income limits through the low-income housing tax credit program. But cities can essentially take a look at what the income levels are that is needed for that particular city, and just reference those income charts. So those income charts are handy references for us to look at, and for nonprofit developers to look at, for tenants to look at. But there are ways of establishing what the rents need to be and that are at various income levels. So just to say it a little bit more simply, we could say, for example, that replacement housing must have housing affordable to folks making 50% AMI, and that's a number in a chart. But council might say, well, deeper affordability levels are needed. So what about the 30% AMI level? And of course, we work on different projects not related to this displacement response project, but other projects where we're addressing folks who may be unsheltered, and there might be units at 15% AMI. So the cities have the ability to look at different AMI levels and not be locked into any particular level that the chart says. So that's the way we would look at it. We hear the feedback and say, what are the rents and what are the levels that are needed? And then we can refer to the chart, but we don't have to be locked in by the chart.
All right, any other questions? You can raise your hand or type your question in the Q&A or the chat. And please go ahead and type or speak in your preferred language. All right, I see a hand from Edie.
So I just wanted to support Phil's comment about, and Raina's too, about BMR rental rates being, not that different than the naturally affordable housing in the community. And I wonder if, because there is a rent registry that is being further utilized bit by bit of CSFRA units. And I wonder if BMR units could be linked to that and, have the BMR rents, at least for move-in rate, be linked to something hopefully lower, maybe equal, because BMR units are often newer, but I would prefer lower than the naturally affordable housing averages that we are, finding out what the registry tells us is the CSFRA rent levels. So BMR lower than CSFRA rent levels. Thank you.
Thanks, Edie. We can take a look at that. As folks are pondering perhaps their last questions, we want to encourage you to sign up for the interest list. That's a really good way to just automatically receive updates, especially when the council meeting is getting finalized, and you'll have a date. And of course, it'll be updated on the website, but if you sign up for the interest list, you'll get a notification about that. And then again, encourage folks, if you would like to schedule a one-on-one meeting, we have a good amount of time to be able to meet with folks and talk about any particular areas of focus that you may have. So want to encourage that as well. That's the displacement response website that we've been sharing. It's also, again, on the internet, and we'll endeavor to respond as quickly as possible to find a time.
All right, do you see a final hand here from Alex? You can unmute.
Yeah. Hey, just can you guys hear me? Quick question.
Yes.
All right, cool. A quick question more than a comment. I just wanted to know if through the process, any of the kind of developers or kind of property owners have expressed or noted any kind of thoughts around kind of like how rezoning may or may not influence the feasibility of projects or their ability to maintain property as a long-term like increase to value, just in terms of like upzoning, basically. If you could just touch on anything that might have been discussed, if at all, I think that'd be really helpful.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, we had folks say that having higher floor area ratios or higher densities can create value for the property owner, and it can help be able to absorb any local replacement requirements. So definitely upzoning or increasing development capacity on a particular site would be very helpful.
Okay, I do see we have a Q&A question in Spanish. If we could have one of our translators translate that for us.
Hi, yeah, so it says, hi, my name is Maria, and I just wanted to support the comments that Reina made.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, maybe I can ask for a final call for questions or comments or raised hands.
Okay, have a hand here from Edie. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm just curious what other cities you've been looking at that might have stronger policies than Mountain View or that are giving you ideas.
Thanks, Edie. What we found is that a lot of cities are evaluating different programs, but not all cities are looking at the same things. So there's a group of cities that are looking at Opportunity Purchase Act programs, and we're trying to get a nice snapshot of other types of policies that folks are looking at. So community land trusts, we're looking at regions or cities that may have community land trusts or co-op type of programs, as well as local replacement requirements. And so we're doing that, but it's not really possible to say whether there is one city that's doing every city is doing its own thing for the folks that are doing those things. So so we don't have an exact comparison, but we are looking at the input that we received about different parts, and then we're just trying to find and look for good case studies, again, whether it's in the Bay Area or California or even across the country. Okay, I think we will just do one final call, and if there's no other questions, again, thank you so much for your participation. It's an important topic. The diverse range of input gives us a lot to try to pull together, but it makes for really good information to try to sum up and bring back to council. So I appreciate, and we appreciate all the input that you've all provided. Appreciate your time. Please do reach out to us, sign up for the interest list, and when we have confirmation of the council meeting date, we will post it and send that out. So with that, I think I do have one. Oh, I see a heart. Thanks, Alex. Thank you all very much, and have a really good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.